Okay. Today we're going to be talking about the Shakespearean theater. In Shakespeare's time, a stage wasn't just one type of space. Plays had to be versatile. The same play might be pronounced an outdoor playhouse, an indoor theater, a royal palace, or for some company or tour, a courtyard of an inn. In any of these settings, men and boys played all the characters. Male, female, acting in Renaissance England was exclusively male profession. Audience had their favorite performers, looked forward to hearing the music with the productions, and relished the luxurious costumes of the leading characters. The stage itself was relatively bare. For most part, playwrights used vivid words instead of scenery to picture the scene on stage. We could look at Shakespeare Documented to see primary source materials and about theaters and people in the theatrical profession connected to Shakespeare. The online resource of these items from Fulver and the other institutions bring all together all the known manuscript and print references to Shakespeare and the works of his lifetime and shorter therefore. Playhouses in the Globe. In 1576, when Shakespeare was about 12 years old in Standoff upon Avon, James Barg built the theater just outside London. The theater was among the first playhouses in England since Roman times. Like many of the other playhouses that followed, it was a multi-sided structure with a central uncovered yard surrounded by 3 tiers of covered seating and a bare raised stage at one of the yards. Spectators could pay for the seating at multiple prices. Those with the cheapest tickets simply stood for the lengths of the plays. Shakespeare's company, Lord and Chamberlain's Men, was one of several to perform at the theater. Appearing there by about 1549, a few years later, the Bargs lost their lease at the theater site and began construction of a new, larger playhouse, the Globe, just south of Thames. To pay for it, they shared the lease with 5 partners, all called actor shares. And Lord Chamberlain's company, including Shakespeare. The Globe, which appeared in 1599, became the playhouse where audiences first saw some Shakespeare best known plays. In 1613, it burned to the ground when the roof caught fire during performance of Shakespeare. Henry the Eighth. A new second Globe was quickly built in the same site, opening in 1614. On Shakespeare Documented, Shakespeare's playhouses. Right here, we can see a picture of 20th century conception of the Globe Theater at Walter Hodges. Theaters and places. Large open theaters, playhouses like the Globe, are marvelous in the right weather, but outdoor theaters can operate year-round, out of the sun, wind, and rain. They offer the more intimate setting with the useful artificial light. Shakespeare's company planned for years to operate its indoor theater, a goal that was finally achieved in 1609 when barges took over London's Blackfriars theaters. Still more indoor productions often came during the time between Christmas and New Year, at Shovis, the period of Lent. At one of the royal palaces where Shakespeare's company and the leading companies gave command performances, a high honor that was well paid. Audience experiences. Playgoers in Shakespeare's day paid a penny to stand in an uncovered yard of a playhouse, or 2 pennies for a balcony seat. It was hard to find the exact comparisons of what a penny then is worth now, but a day worth of food and drink in a gown man would cost about 4 pence. Indoor theater, like Blackfriars, accompanied fewer people and cost more. The basic ticket starting at 6 pence. Fashionable men that town could get a seat on the side of the stage of 2 shillings, 24 pence. Spectators like to drink wine and ale and snack on a variety of foods as they watch the plays. Modern day excavations at the Playhouse have turned up bottles, spoons, and oyster shells and remnants of fruits and nuts. Actors' costumes and staging. While most women's roles were played by boys or young men in the all-male cast, comic female parts such as Juliet's nurse might be reversed to a popular adult comic actor or clown. In addition to dramatic talents, actors in Shakespeare's time had fenced out stage with great skill sing songs or play instruments included in the plays and perform vigorous athletic dances in their day. Actors usually do not aim at historically accurate costumes, although the occasional toga may have appeared for a Roman play. Instead, they typically wear gorgeous modern dress, especially in leading parts. Costumes, a major investment for acting company, provided essential spectacle of the plays and were often secondhand clothes were once owned and worn by real-life nobles. Various stages of Shakespeare's day had little or no scenery except for objects required like the plot, like a throne, a grave, or a bed. Exit and entrances were in plain view of the audiences, and they're included in some vertical options, like actors could descend from heavens above the stage or enter the exit from the hell below the trapdoor. Characters described as taking from above might appear in the galleys midway between the stage and the heavens. This is the stage and screen after Shakespeare. In 1642, the English playwrights in the theater were closed down and often dismantled for building materials, such as the English Civil War began, the restoration of the English monarchy. In 1660, theater returned, as did Shakespeare's plays. Now, with both male and female performance, the first recorded performance as an actress occurred in December 1660. Although we're not sure of her name, she appeared as Desdemona in Othello, which we're going to talk about Othello today. In the centuries that followed, Shakespeare's plays have been performed in England, North America, and around the world. The production of the major state of the theater in each place and time, from lavish scenes to surrealism to stark bare stages. They have been used as a medium for political commentary and have been incorporated into theatrical traditions like Japanese kabuki theater. Beginning in late 1800s, Shakespeare's plays inspired the creation of the wealth of replica Elizabethan theaters, and more or less faithful to what is known as theatrical past. Dozens of open-air Shakespeare festivals have also grown up across the United States and other countries. Shakespeare's works have been frequently interpreted on film. Brooklyn's Phonograph Company, for one, produced several silent, one-reel movies of the play starting in 1908. Since then, literally hundreds of Shakespeare films, including works like Baz Luhrmann's Romeo plus Juliet, 1996, have appeared, opening new systematic stage of Shakespearean words. We'll continue to read more of this, but I want to start us off with some videos about Shakespeare from TED Talks. This first one is Shakespeare is Everywhere by Christopher Gaze, and then the next one is Why Shakespeare, because it's 2016. So we'll go back to reading about Shakespeare theater, but I want to go over our discussion for today is the life and the theater of Shakespeare's time. We're focusing on that. And then we're also talking about Shakespeare and the tragedy of Othello. And then for homework, I want you to find a modern film adaptation of Shakespeare and then read original play or watch a film. And you could write like 2 pages, like it should be about 5 paragraphs, like 25 sentences, comparing and contrasting the play and the adaptation. Did the adaptation remain true to the intent of the play?
I resisted. It looked fantastic, though. Well, now, what a day we're having. Hello. You've been eating Pop-Tarts. I resisted. It looked fantastic, though. Well, now, what a day we're having. Absolutely inspirational, fantastic. I saw Romeo Dallaire remark on these geese earlier on, and I considered these geese Canada geese. They're all over the world, you know. They're taking over the world. A bit like Shakespeare. Shakespeare surrounds us. The Shakespeare we're enormously familiar with, but the Shakespeare that we know and we don't know. And of course, every day, we're quoting Shakespeare, but we don't know it. Shakespeare, we don't know a great deal about the man. What we know about him is generally through his works. He was a man, just like you and me. He lived his life, felt great joy and great sadness, tremendous success, and great tragedy. In Canada, talk about Shakespeare surrounding us. We have the Stratford Shakespeare Festival in Ontario. That's the biggest theatre festival, I might add, in North America. We have, that's right. We have Bard on the Beach Shakespeare here in Vancouver. We got Shakespeare festivals in between. In America, Americans love their Shakespeare. You have Ashland, Oregon, lots of Shakespeare's festivals through America. You have the Globe in London, and of course, the Royal Shakespeare Company in Stratford-upon-Avon. So Shakespeare is alive and well. But since you leapt out of bed this morning, and you've had this wonderful day here, I'm sure most of you are very much unaware that you've been quoting Shakespeare all day. Let me give you a bunch of examples. First of all, I want you to do something for a change. When I point at you and beckon you on, I want you to say, quoting Shakespeare. Now, come on, with all that energy from the Pop-Tarts. Give it a go. That's pretty good. Once more, even louder. If you cannot understand my argument and declare it's Greek to me, you are? If you claim to be more sinned against than sinning, you are? If you recall your salad days, you are? If you act more in sorrow than in anger, if your wish is farther to the thought, if your lost property has vanished into thin air, you are? If you've ever refused to budge an inch or suffered from green-eyed jealousy, if you've been played fast and loose, been tongue-tied, a tower of strength, hoodwinked, or in a pickle, if you have knitted your brows, made a virtue of necessity, insisted on fair play, slept not one wink, stood on ceremony, danced attendance on your lord and master, laughed yourself into stitches, had short shrift, cold comfort, or too much of a good thing. If you've seen better days or lived in a fool's paradise, why, be that as it may, the more fool you, for it is a foregone conclusion that you are, as good luck would have it. If you think it is early days and clear out bag and baggage, if you think it is high time and that is the long and the short of it, if you believe that the game is up and that the truth will out, even if it involves your own flesh and blood, if you lie low till the crack of doom because you suspect foul play, if you have your teeth set on edge at one fell swoop without rhyme or reason, then to give the devil his due, if the truth were known, for surely you have a tongue in your head, you are? Even if you bid me good riddance and send me packing, if you wish I was as dead as a doornail, if you think I'm an eyesore, a laughingstock, the devil incarnate, a stony-hearted villain, bloody-minded, or a blinking idiot, then, by Jove, oh Lord, tut, tut, for goodness sake, what the dickens, but me no buts, it's all one to me, for you are... There you are. So, Shakespeare surrounds us. Let's look at the private man that I alluded to a moment ago. The private man, the playwright in London, the producer, the actor. There's a gorgeous little sonnet. A sonnet is a 14-line poem, and Shakespeare wrote over 150 of those. And this particular one, it's perhaps one of the best-known pieces of poetry, I think, probably in the world. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Now, generally, this little piece of poetry is said or recited or written down for great occasions, weddings, birthdays, celebrations. But there's a theory that, in fact, nestling inside this poetry, if you think of it another way, Shakespeare, we didn't know, and the mystery that surrounds all that, that in fact, this little sonnet was a eulogy. Shakespeare had three children. One of them was a son. His little boy was called Hamnet, not Hamlet. This one's Hamnet. The other one, Hamlet, is a very good play he wrote. But his son was called Hamnet. And he got word when he was working away in London that Hamnet was very sick. Now here's the man like you and me, living his life, and now crisis hits. And of course he has to go. He has to go from London. Now, if we were to drive from central London to Stratford-upon-Avon now, where his family were, that would probably take us, if we had a good run, a little over 90 minutes. But in those days, it was 3 days. So Shakespeare took off and he got there. And when he got to Stratford, he was met by his family. And he found out that his son was dead, buried. There was nothing left to do. But what could he do apart from comfort his family? But to survive it, what was he going to do? You imagine the heartache. I like to imagine that perhaps after everyone had gone to bed, he stayed up, the candle and his quill pen, and he wrote. And he did what Shakespeare could do best of all. Through words, he could express his feelings. And I like to think he wrote this little poem, "Shall I compare thee to a summer's day?" And he talks about eternity in the poem. And as long as men can breathe and eyes can see, this lives forever. That this froze little Hamnet in time, in his mind, to be an immortal in Shakespeare's lifetime. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Thou art more lovely and more temperate. Rough winds do break the darling buds of May, and summer's lease hath all too short a date. Sometimes too hot the eye of heaven shines, and often is his gold complexion dimmed. And every fair from fair sometime declines by chance, or nature's changing course untrimmed. But thy eternal summer shall not fade, nor lose possession of that fair thou owest, nor shall death brag thou wanderest in his shade, when in eternal lines to time thou growest. So long as men can breathe, or eyes can see, so long lives this, and this gives life to thee. A eulogy? I don't know. It's beautiful. There's a mystery about it, as there is about so much of Shakespeare. And I think that's part of the magic of it all. Now is the winter of our discontent. Now is the winter of our discontent. My goodness gracious. Look at Europe right now. Occupy Wall Street. Occupy everywhere else. Well, it sounds positively Shakespearean. But in times like this, when there's so much going on in the world and it's all so deeply complicated, this is a time, I think, that if we could skip forward 400 years, that Shakespeare would thrive. This is a time for great initiative, great inspiration, great leadership. This is time for heroes, I think, to help to show us the way. Shakespeare was rich in heroes too. Look at Henry V. We happy few, we band of brothers. Wonderful stuff. And then, now is the winter of our discontent. Who was that? Richard, Duke of Gloucester. It's the opening line of Richard III. Richard III. What does he want? He wants trouble. He wants trouble, and he doesn't care. He's willing to risk everything. Talk about being bold. His eldest brother is the king. There's another brother in between. The king has two prince sons. So Richard, Duke of Gloucester, the younger brother, is never going to be king, not unless something fantastic happens. But he's going to force that. And he tells us all about it off the top of Richard III. Malevolent, dangerous. But nevertheless, we as an audience, he seduces us. We become complicit in his dreadful plans. And it's the most extraordinary feeling sitting in the audience, watching him, Richard, lay waste to all these people and sitting there thinking, yes, yes, yes. It's an awful feeling. Richard III, deformed, as he calls himself, the traditional withered left side, the crook back. Now is the winter of our discontent, made glorious summer by this son of York, and all the clouds that lowered upon our house in the deep bosom of the ocean, bedded. Now are our brows bound with victorious wreaths, our bruised arms hung up for monuments, our stern alarums changed to merry meetings, our dreadful marches to delightful measures. Grim-visaged war hath smoothed his wrinkled front, and now, instead of mounting barbed steeds to fright the souls of fearful adversaries, he capers nimbly in a lady's chamber to the lascivious pleasings of a lute. But I, that am not shaped for sportive tricks, nor made to court an amorous looking glass, I, that am rudely stamped, and want love's majesty to strut before a wanton ambling nymph, I, that am curtailed of this fair proportion, cheated of feature by dissembling nature, deformed, unfinished, sent before my time into this breathing world scarce half made up, and that's so lamely and unfashionable the dogs bark at me as I halt by them. And therefore, since I cannot prove a lover to entertain these fair, well-spoken days, I'm determined to prove a villain and hate the idle pleasures of these days. It has been a hard day's night, and I've been working like a dog. It's been a hard day's night, and I should be sleeping like a log. But when I get home to you, I find the things that you do will make me feel all right. So that, perhaps, was the Shakespeare you did not know. Tweet that. Thanks very much.
Okay. That was great. memorized a lot for that. And this is another one. And as you know, we take a lot of quotes from Shakespeare, like to be or not to be. And I remember in high school, I used to use the quote, life is a stage and we are mere actors. I love that quote. I used to use it all the time. We see these quotes from Shakespeare put in our own stories, stories that we read, movies, quotes on cards, greetings, everyday conversations. Shakespeare is still around in the words. He may be dead, long gone, but his words stay with us.
So I talked to Craig, said, come do a TED Talk for my students. And I thought, why? I'm a professor, I get paid to talk for 50 minutes. How the hell am I going to only talk for 15 or 18? So I thought, I'll give it a go. I said, what should I do? He said, well, talk about Shakespeare. And I thought, why Shakespeare? Right? Why Shakespeare? The only answer I could come up with was to plagiarize our gorgeous young prime minister and say, well, it's 2016. Right? That's a start. Right? And it's the easiest one, right? Because 400 years and 6 days ago, on April 23rd, Shakespeare died. Prince died this week. He's had a lot of press. Would he still have that press 400 years from now? I don't know. Will there be a press 400 years from now? Probably not. So why? Why after 400 years? In 2012, during the London Olympics, lots of exciting things happened. One of them we probably all remember is the Lightning Man, right? Usain Bolt repeated it again, right? Won all those sprint events. Hundreds of thousands of people witnessed something else. Every Olympics matches sport with culture, and there's always a cultural Olympiad. In 2012 in London, they chose Shakespeare. There were over 100 productions between April the 23rd and the end of the event in November. 70 of those took place in the Globe Theatre. They represented countries, over 40 countries from around the world, and they were in 37 different languages. Why? Most of those countries had been colonized by the English. Having thrown off all the shackles of colonization, why had they kept Shakespeare? And why did they want to listen to Shakespeare in their own language? And why, when they came to London, did thousands of people living in London whose origins were in those countries come to listen to Shakespeare in the language into which they had been born? That's what I want to talk to you about today. Right? The power of listening to Shakespeare. That's why I don't want a text up there, because that would contradict me. Right? And that's why I'm glad we closed that book. Right? When Shakespeare was first performed, and for well over 200 years, when people wrote about going to plays, when they wrote about going to a Shakespeare play or any play, they would write in their diary, they would write in their commonplace book, last night I went and I heard Midsummer Night's Dream. Last night I went and I heard Hamlet. No one ever wrote until well into the 19th century that they saw a play, because a play is about voice. And no one understood that more than Shakespeare did. We are there because it consoles us to hear a human voice. Because we want a voice to make the sounds of joy and sorrow for us. Because what matters in life is what we apprehend, what we seize, what seizes us. Those things that make us terrified, and those things that make us joyful. And theater brings us those, and Shakespeare no more so. So it's curious, not tragic, just curious, that when students come to me in university, majority of them say, oh, Shakespeare, I don't know. So I was so hard in high school. Some of them will say, oh, I loved it, right? I'll say, what did you love about it? Oh, the movies. There's such great Shakespeare movies. And I have to say, well, no. Shakespeare,
is not about watching a movie. Right? There has to be a person there, a person who is enduring the story for us, so that in witnessing it, we can be grasped and grasp in turn the emotions that are being experienced. Don't be afraid of Shakespeare. Right? Most of my students, many of you, one of the reasons I thought, well, we'll do this, right? Because, Craig said there'll be over 900 students here, and they're all going to be doing Shakespeare at some point or other, holding their noses or not, right? And I said, well, what do they do? Well, the usual things. Midsummer Night's Dream, Hamlet, Romeo and Juliet, Macbeth. I thought, oh, great. Well, we'll get there, we'll see, we'll talk about some of those, right? But most of them probably also use the No Fear Shakespeare cribs, right? That translate Shakespeare into English, as if it wasn't English to begin with, right? And the Sparks Notes people have made millions of dollars off the backs of No Fear Shakespeare, right? But, when we shouldn't have feared him to begin with, huh? And Shakespeare never made a penny in his life off of the printing of his plays. He could not have cared less. When the folio came out, 7 years after his death, it came out because the surviving partners of his company wanted to make a memorial. He never cared. There were hundreds of editions of his works. He never made a penny on them because it wasn't about reading. And that's what I want to focus on now. I want to take a couple of scenes and I want to talk you through them. And I want to try to give you a sense of what you can apprehend when you look and listen, right? And what I'm going to say to you now, and perhaps repeat and concluding, because I have no idea where I'm going. Right? It'll depend on what we hear when we listen to these texts. Right? Don't look for meaning. There isn't any. Don't look for a thesis. Don't hunt themes. Don't analyze metaphors. Don't worry about what you're going to write your essay about. Right? Just listen. And open yourself up as you listen. And be very responsive to what you feel. Because apprehension is far more important than comprehension. And in Midsummer Night's Dream, one of Shakespeare's extraordinary figures, the Duke Theseus, says precisely that at the end of the play. And he says, one of the interesting things about life is this. He said, whenever we apprehend an effect, we want to comprehend a cause. And that's a problem, especially with theater and always with life. Something happens to us and we want to know why, right? Well, the cause doesn't matter. Who knows what the first cause of anything is? Was it God the Creator or the Big Bang? They're beyond my comprehension, right? But in the moment of life, I apprehend constantly what it is to be living. And to seek meaning in that, rather than to simply swim in the luxuriousness of my own soul and heart, seems like an extraordinary abandonment of the joy of living. So let's look at Shakespeare. We'll go through maybe just one scene. The screen here tells me I've got 9.5 minutes. Right, to see what we can do. That should give us enough for one. I'm going to give you a choice. I've got a few things on my mind. Let's go for two that are big ones out there. If you haven't encountered them yet, you're going to encounter them in your high school years. Romeo and Juliet, Hamlet. Which one do you want? I think Romeo and Juliet. Right, wrong. Craig, what do you think? Romeo, okay. And what? Okay, now if I can stay. Oh boy, I'm under 9 minutes now. So if I can talk like the Bolt Man, right? If we can get through this scene, maybe we do a bit of Hamlet. Maybe we finish with a moment from Hamlet. Okay, here we go. I want you. What I'm going to do with Romeo and Juliet? I'm going to go to the scene where we first meet Juliet because it tells us something about Shakespeare. You know what Shakespeare's really good at? He's great at women. He's great at listening to women and making us listen to women. And there's a reason for that, because in his lifetime, no woman was ever on the stage. No woman ever acted on the English stage until 1665. So men always played the parts of women, and not just boys. There were men in the company who spent their entire career aging through female parts. Right? So in this scene, we first meet Juliet. Right? We have Juliet, we have the nurse, and we have Lady Capulet. Three principal women from the play. Right? We've not met Juliet yet. It's Act 1, Scene 3. But the nurse is sitting. Lady Capulet we've met. And she comes in and says, "Where's my daughter?" We met Lady Capulet in Act 1, Scene 1, when the men were all fighting, causing all that difficulty. The Montagues and the Capulets wrestling with one another, men drawing their swords, all demonstrating their masculinity. Excruciatingly funny. And Lady Capulet knows that. And she mocks her husband. She says to him, "Why bother getting your sword out, old man? There's no point." She's a strong woman. Right? So she comes in and she says, "Where's my daughter?" And the nurse says, "Oh, by my head, these last 12 years," she says, I called her and she didn't come. She said, "I swear by my virginity at 12. I've been calling her, I don't know where she is." And then she gets up and she says, "Juliet, no, I don't want that, really. I don't want anything up there. Can we just kill that? Is it impossible? How do I kill those screens?" Great. And she starts calling her, "Lady Bird, my dear one, where are you?" In most productions, Juliet's on the balcony, or she's not on stage. Because the text says, "Enter Juliet." Because always in the original printings, they say enter when the character speaks. She's already there. Everything the nurse is saying, if you listen, right, is what you do when you're playing with a small child. Right? You must have all have done that, or an aunt or an uncle or parent has done that with you, right? Joey, where are you, Joey? My goodness, Joey, when are you going to come? What am I going to do with you, Joey? And where's Joey the whole time, right? Right there, right? Right behind you, and you pretend you don't see him, right? That's where Juliet is, if we really are listening to what the nurse is doing there. "Lady Bird, my dear one, where are you?" Right? And Lady Capulet is standing watching. Right? And eventually Juliet says, "Here I am. Who wants me?" Playing with the nurse. Right? And the nurse says, "Your mother." Right? And the Lady Capulet says to the nurse, "Will you give us a minute? There's something I need to tell my daughter." And the nurse begins to leave. And Lady Capulet says, "No, come back. Please, come back." And what she needs to tell Juliet is, your father has decided that you're going to be married now. And you're going to meet tonight the man you're going to marry. Now, what's crucial in this scene, if we are listening and looking, is what Lady Capulet's doing, right? Because always in Shakespeare, in crucial scenes, when he wants us to listen, there's a listener on stage. And here it's Lady Capulet, right? Listening while her daughter plays with the nurse. And then the nurse tells a long story, a comic story about Juliet growing up. And Juliet's mother listens, knowing that she's about to tell her daughter childhood is over. What's she feeling while she's listening? What does any parent feel? At that moment, comically in TV ads, where you give your child the keys to the car for the first time. When you leave them at their university residence. When their probation offer comes and takes them away. Whatever the point, where you realize, what happened to my child? How did I miss that? If we're listening, that's what's happening in that scene. Most productions miss that because people are reading and they ignore Lady Capulet. An extraordinary thing happens when the nurse is talking. Right? they're trying to figure out how old Juliet is. And her mother says, oh, I don't think she's 14 yet. And the nurse says, oh, no, it'll be 2 weeks. I remember because my Suzanne, my daughter and her were born at the same time. My Suzanne, who God took from me because she was too good for me. Right? The nurse's daughter died in her infancy, and Juliet lived. The nurse says that looking at Juliet, and Lady Capulet is looking at Juliet. And 2 daughters are dead. And if we're not listening, we miss that. The nurse tells us, my Susan died almost 14 years ago. And Lady Capulet is thinking, my child will be lost to me in 2 weeks when she marries Paris and when she goes to live with him. And when the child I remember playing just disappears, is gone. That's the crucial thing about listening, right? I've got 2 minutes. I'm going to very quickly tell you something about Hamlet and then tie this up. Right? At the end of Hamlet, when all the swordplay is going on and the poisoning and a dozen people are going to be dead on stage and it's going to be full of spectacle and it turns into a real guy flick, right? There's a chick moment in there that's powerful, and it's about mothers. Gertrude says nothing but 3 lines. The first of them is, Hamlet, let me wipe your brow. Right? Take my napkin, she says, and wipe your brow. You look so tired. Right? At the beginning of the play, she had wanted to touch him, and he wouldn't let her touch him. He never lets her touch him in the play. He pulls away because he's angry at her for marrying his uncle, right? Shakespeare gives her as her second last line, let me wipe thy brow. And she takes her handkerchief and wipes the sweat off her son's brow. Just the way your mother, even when you're 62, like me, on a cold day, will tighten up your jacket. Or call you at university and say, is it snowing? Wear your mittens, right? When we don't listen in life, we miss the small things. In literature, listening is crucial to getting those things too. That's why Shakespeare matters. Not because we should read him, but because we should be listening to him. At the beginning of Hamlet, there's a man who's all alone on stage, Francisco, waiting to be relieved by Bernardo. He can be out there alone as long as the director wants to leave him there, saying nothing. Bernardo comes, and Bernardo says, who's there? Because it's dark. And Francisco says, nay, tell me, unfold yourself, he says. Open yourself up to me. And I say to you, unfold yourself when you read Shakespeare. Close the book. Open yourself up. Apprehend. And you won't worry about the meaning. Unfold, listen, and allow life and literature to touch you. Thank you.
Aren't those cool? Actually, again, I mean, it's cool, but we want to get back to the reading. So this is back to the Shakespeare. Shakespeare Playhouses here. In 1599, Shakespeare's company began performing at the newly constructed theater, the Globe. They had previously performed at the theater, which they vacated and disassembled after the property dispute. They used the timbers to build a polygonal open-air playhouse with multiple levels of seating, up to 3,000 spectators. Several surviving accounts by a famous astrologer, a Barnet's tutor, a German prince secretary, among others, including descriptions of Shakespeare's plays being performed there. In June 1613, the original Globe burned down during performance of Shakespeare's Henry VIII. A second globe reopened. Hold on one moment. Okay, sorry, someone was at the door. In 1596, the actor and the theater builder James Barger bought a property in Blackfriars, a London neighborhood site of a former monastery. He converted into England's first purpose-built indoor theater, the Blackfriars Playhouse. Although it had fewer seats than the outdoor seating and needed artificial lighting, the Lord Chamberlain's men could perform there in the winter and charge more for admissions. The aristocratic neighbors in Blackfriars, however, did not want to rowdy playhouse next door. They petitioned to prevent Shakespeare's company from performing there, and Barks leased a newly renovated theatrical space instead of a company of child actors. More than a decade later, in 1608, the Lord Chamberlain's men, now the King's men, reclaimed the space. Shakespeare was one of the original 7 shareholders of the reorganized Blackfriars Playhouse, and in 1613, he purchased the house in Blackfriars, not far from the theater. Right here, you can see all the documents. This was November 1596, neighbors' petition of November 1956 against the Playhouse in Blackfriars. This undated petition of the Privy Council, signed by the neighbors of a prospective playhouse. Blackfriars is one of the 3 related documents, all the same hand, among state papers and national archives. Then you have this other document right here. I love the fancy writing. February 4th, 1596, Blackfriars Playhouse, James Bargs purchased property in Blackfriars. In 1596, actor and theater builder James Barg bought property in Blackfriars, a London neighborhood on the site of former monastery. His purchase included 7 great upper rooms, as they are now divided, as well as some lower rooms and adjoining staircases and yards. Then we have May 16th, 1599, we have acquisition postpartum of Thomas Burns, showing Shakespeare and other occupying the Global Playhouse. The acquisition postpartum of Thomas Burns shown here is the near contemporary witness of the lease of the site of the Globe on Maid Lane, South Wark, and the witness to the recent construction of the house itself. June 26, 1601, Shakespeare's associate properties bargain and sale of a treatment in Blackfriars to Cuthbert and Richard Bark, vendor's copy. James Bark died in 1596. His sons, Richard and Cuthbert, were principal shareholders on the Globe, inherited Blackfriars Theater from their father. In 1601, they purchased rooms adjacent to it. Their signatures on the barge in the cell indenture appear on the photo here above. October 7, 1601, the deed of transfer in the Globe and the other properties from Nicholas Bren to Sir Matthew Brown and John Collett, listing William Shakespeare Gent. It was dated in October 7th, 1601, and this was the first of 5 enrolled indentures of the bargain and sale of the Global site, naming William Shakespeare Elysee. The Global Playhouse was first built in 1599 and leased from Sir Thomas Brennan. October 10th, 1601, was updated deed of transfer of the Globe and other properties from Nicholas Bren to Sir Matthew Brown and John Collett, listing William Shakespeare. Dated October 10th, 1601, and the second of the 5 enrolled indentures of the bargain and the sale of Global site, naming William Shakespeare as the lessee. The Global Playhouse was first built in 1599 on the land leased by Sir Nicholas Brent. In 1602, we have Allen v. Barge. Following the expiration of the lease, the site of the Theatre Scorners, 1597. It was Richard and Cupboard Brouch, James Barge's sons, founded themselves embroiled in a series of lawsuits with Giles Allen, who owned the land, and their father had leased the playhouse. November 11th, 1608, the deed of transfer of the Globe and other properties from John Colet to Sir Thomas Browley, listing William Shakespeare. Dated November 11, 1608. This is the third of 5 enrolled indentures of the bargain in the sale of the Global site naming William Shakespeare as the lessee. The Global Playhouse was built in 1599 on the land leased from Sir Nicholas Brent. February 8th, 1610, this Keystar Burge case bill of complaint of Robert Keystar, citizen and goldsmith of London, against Richard Barge, Gent, Henry Evans, Cupboard Barge, John Hemmings, and Henry Gondo. Shakespeare document is still growing. Descriptive content and Shakespeare still continue to be added, updated, and expanded. Check back for regular updates. February 12, 1610. The Keystar Barge case, the joint and several answers of Richard Garbage and Cobert Bargage and John Hemmings and Henry Gondo. Shakespeare document is still growing. Descriptive content and transcriptions continue to be added, updated, expanded. So there you can see the actual documents. That was Shakespeare document. The Lord Chamberlain's Men. This has to do with Shakespeare's company. Patronage of wealthy and noble individuals was highly desirable for writers and poets throughout early modern period. It was obviously essential for players. Per Essay and Punishment, the Vacatables issued in 1572, any group of individuals who wished to travel and sell, perform, and otherwise purvey their goods or services needed to have a patronage of either 2 judges or 1 nobleman. As the law was revised and refined, only the highest of noblemen were allowed to provide patronage to acting troops. It was partially a political move for the aristocracy of the time, but was extremely influential in the organization of professional groups of players. Elizabeth I was the first to perform a troupe under the patronage of city monarch in 1574, and James I, whose known as the patronage of the artists, poets, and actors, was quick to make Shakespeare's theatre company. Lord Chamberlain's Men, his own once reached London, May 1603. At the time, the London Theatre was closed due to the plague. And it reopened. The warrant decreed was the players were to perform within their own usual house called the Globe, and throughout the country for the recreation of our loving subjects and the king's solace and pleasure when it shall think good to they see them. Shakespeare and his fellows were now called the King's Men. And there's a movie called King's Men too. It's like a spy movie. Just a little bit more about Shakespeare's Playhouse. In 1599, Shakespeare's company began performing at their newly constructed theater called the Globe that previously performed at the theater, which they vacated and disassembled in property dispute. They used the timbers from to build the polygonal open-air playhouse with multiple levels of seating for up to 3,000 spectators. Several surviving accounts by a famous astrologer, a baronet's tutor, and a German prince's secretary, among others, including descriptions of Shakespeare's plays being performed there. In June 1613, the original Globe burned down during the performance of Shakespeare Henry VIII. The second Globe was built and reopened by June 1614. In 1596, actor and theater builder James Barge bought some property in Blacksmiths, a London neighborhood at the site of the former monastery. He converted it to England's first purpose-built indoor theater, the Blackfriars Playhouse. Although it had fewer seats than the outdoor playhouse and needed artificial lighting, the Lord Chamberlain's Men could perform there in the winter and charge more for admissions. Democratic neighbors like the Blackfriars, however, were not a rowdy playhouse next door. They petitioned to prevent Shakespeare's company from performing there, Barge released newly renovated theatrical space instead of the company of the child actors. More than a decade later, 1608, the Lord Chamberlain's men, now King's men, reclaimed the space, and Shakespeare's one of the original 7 shareholders of the reorganized Blackfriars Playhouse. In 1613, he purchased the Blackfriars not from the theater. And here's some notes about theater in the age of Shakespeare. The theater in Shakespeare's time was much different than today. Authors wrote plays for the masses, especially those who couldn't read or write. And the theater changed a lot during Shakespeare's lifetime. The authorities didn't like it and didn't allow acting in the city itself. They thought it was a bad influence on the people and kept them from going to church. Queen Elizabeth, on the other hand, loved acting and helped the theater become popular. As time went on, more and more popular theaters emerged outside city walls. This was considered an unsafe area with crime and prostitution. Shakespeare's theater was full of life. People did not sit all the time and were not quiet during performance. The audience could walk around, eat, and drink during the play. They cheered, booed, and sometimes even threw objects at the actors. Theaters were open arenas or playhouses that had room at the 3,000 people. There were structures made mainly of wood. There were no heating or actors got wet when it rained. The stage was higher and there was open pit in front of it where most of the people could stand in it. Richer people and noblemen sat in the gallery. There was almost no scenery because the dialogue was the most important part of the play. Colorful and well-designed costumes were important and told people about the status of the character. Women never performed in plays, so young men played female characters. The performances took place in the afternoon because it was too dark at night. There were no stage crew, as there is today, and actors had to do everything themselves, from making their costumes to setting the stage. Plays were organized by acting companies. They performed about 6 different plays each week because they needed the money to survive. They had almost no time for rehearsals. The companies in Shakespeare's time had a heretical system. The company belonged to Shakespeare managers. They were responsible for everything, and they got most of the money when the company was successful. Sometimes they even owned their own buildings. Actors worked for the managers, and after some time became permanent member of the company. Apprentices were young boys who were allowed to act in menial roles. They played female characters in plays. Lord Chamberlain's men and Admiral's men were the most important companies in London at the time. Among most famous theaters were the Globe, the Swan, and the Fortune. Here's a reconstruction of the Globe Theatre in London on the bottom of this. So you can see what their theater looked like during that time. This was taken from the English Online History of the Elizabethan Theaters. So this is our next one, To Lead or Not to Lead, Changing the World with Shakespeare.
Improve your kids' grades with perfectly matched tutors.
When I was 15 years old, William Shakespeare changed my life. I thought I was going to be a painter, but I heard there was this play called Hamlet that was the greatest play ever written, and that there was a film version of this by Laurence Olivier, who produced, directed, and acted in the film, and the film won Best Picture, and Olivier won the Academy Award for Best Actor. I thought that sounded really cool, and I wanted to check it out. So I went to my local video store. This is about 800 years ago. And I rented a small Betamax copy of this 1948 black and white film. I went home, I put it into my VCR, and on a hot summer afternoon in Texas, in the outskirts of Houston, in a trailer where I was living, I experienced Shakespeare for the first time through the lens of Laurence Olivier's Hamlet. It was as if the heavens parted and some divine spirit was speaking directly to all of the doubts, the questions, the insecurities I had. I was suddenly hearing and experiencing the most profound thoughts on the meaning of existence, what it meant to be a man, and what it meant to be a human. Now, on top of this guy Hamlet, he lived in a castle. He had a sword fight that he won even after he was poisoned by the bad guy, and he kissed two really beautiful women. That was it. I was done. Shakespeare for life for me. It was obvious after watching this film that Shakespeare and I were meant to be. I immediately formed a high school Shakespeare society. We would get together before class and read sonnets and read parts of the plays. We would go see Shakespeare plays. We even tried to put some on, although usually at around the second or third rehearsal, everyone stopped coming except me. But something happened to me. My world was changed because through the lens of Laurence Olivier and Shakespeare, I began to understand myself in a deep way. And once I began to think and understand myself, I began to understand the world. Now, it wasn't until much later that I knew what really happened. In 2006, at Liverpool University, a group of scientists, researchers, and English professors got together and they did a study on Shakespeare on the brain. What they found was remarkable. They discovered that Shakespeare affects the right hemisphere of the brain, specifically the part of the brain that deals with autobiographical memory. Now, this is the part of your brain that re-examines and re-evaluates experience. An N400 is the name we give to a brain response that happens 400 milliseconds after we experience a normal thought or perception. A P600 is a brain response that occurs 600 milliseconds after we experience an extraordinary thought or perception. And that extra 200 milliseconds are needed because the brain goes into a moment of sort of temporary paralysis while new pathways and new connections are made. Shakespeare consistently produces P600 experiences in the brain. Shakespeare changes your brain. It changes young brains and it changes old brains alike. It changed mine, and he's been changing brains around the world for the last 400 years. You know, I'm often asked, why Shakespeare? And there are a lot of reasons. We'll get into some of them later. But I think we overlook one of the most important ones. Shakespeare makes money. Shakespeare is really good business. Do you know this year alone in Warwickshire, that's the part of England where Stratford-upon-Avon is, the Shakespeare tourism industry, this year alone is estimated to generate over £630 million, creating over 11,000 jobs in one part of the world. But Shakespeare isn't done in just one part of the world. Shakespeare is done everywhere, in every country in which any kind of language is being spoken: Hebrew, Japanese, Russian, Czech, Polish, French, German. The words of William Shakespeare are being spoken today, right now, in every country in which any kind of theatrical performance is being given. And why is that? Well, we often hear things about Shakespeare cuts across social, political, economic, religious boundaries, that his works are timeless in theme, that they somehow combine the lyrical and the bawdy, the highbrow and the lowbrow in a way that intermingles with the complexity of life. And that's definitely true. But after my 28-year relationship with Shakespeare, I think there's something else to it. Human beings love stories. Stories are the way we contextualize our existence. And we love nothing more than stories about great individuals who are successful in life. And all of Shakespeare's plays are about individuals who want to achieve happiness and reduce their own suffering. This is every single play, whether it's Juliet, Rosalind, Henry V, Cleopatra, Portia. It's about people who want to make their lives better and their communities' lives better. Now, in Shakespeare's day, there still existed the remnants of this medieval belief called the Great Chain of Being. Shakespeare himself probably didn't totally believe in this, but it was still woven into the fabric of society. It permeated everything. Simplistically, the Great Chain of Being is a system of looking at the universe, where everything in existence has a fixed place on this metaphysical chain. At the very top is God, heaven, and order. At the very bottom, the devil, hell, and chaos. And everything has its place. The lion is the king of beasts. He's closer to God, higher above than a bullfrog. Now, only men and women can change their place on this ladder. Through their actions and their free will, Human beings can rise up towards heaven or down towards hell. And this is the fundamental story of every Shakespeare play. Someone who is trying to change their position on this ladder. Someone who is trying to achieve happiness and reduce their suffering. Now, sometimes the good guys win. Henry V, they go up. Other times the plays are about the bad guys. Someone like Richard III, who decides the only way to achieve happiness and reduce his suffering is to go down towards hell. Since I cannot prove a lover and entertain these fair, well-spoken days, I am determined to prove a villain and hate the idle pleasures of these days. Now, Shakespeare is primarily concerned with leaders and leadership, because all of his great characters, Juliet, Rosalind, Henry V, they're all leaders in the most simple way. They want to improve their lives, and they want to improve the lives of their communities. Shakespeare had a very important contribution to this question of leadership. It consumed him, it fascinated him, and he wrote about it throughout his whole career. He believed that great leaders were made, not born. He believed that achievement was earned. It was not bestowed. And this is the story of so many of his plays. The great history cycle, the Henriad, the first Henriad, which deals with Richard II, Henry IV, Part 1 and 2, and Henry V, is focused primarily on this issue. It begins with Richard II. Now, Richard II is the supreme example of a very bad king. He believes he is God on earth. He believes in the divine right of kings. He spends a lot of time in the play saying things like, "We are amazed, and thus long have we stood to watch the fearful bending of thy knee." He's concerned with the trappings and benefits of leadership and authority, not with the duties and responsibilities of leadership and authority. His downfall is inevitable. But the story of that play is, as he is usurped and comes closer and closer to his death, he discovers his humanity. Now, Richard II is usurped by Henry IV. But at the very beginning of the play, we find that Henry is dying. He's sick from some mysterious disease, and the stress and burdens of leadership are aging him. This is something we encounter every day. How many times have we elected, quite willingly, bright, young, energetic, healthy leaders, only to discover the stress and strain of leadership after only a very short time in office changes them? We see this all the time. And eventually, Henry IV dies from the burden of leadership. He's also greatly concerned before he dies that his son, Prince Hal, is entirely unfit to be king. The last play in the cycle, Henry V, is the ultimate story of a human being who forges their own destiny, who controls the outcome of their life with very simple beliefs. Henry fakes it until he makes it. He models the way. At the beginning of his life, Prince Hal was the last person you would expect to be a great king. He was hanging out in bars, in pubs, with prostitutes, with thieves. He was drinking. He was gambling. He was robbing people. He was avoiding responsibility. Upon the death of his father, Henry undergoes a massive change. We start to understand that maybe some of the things he was doing with a purpose. He wanted to understand the people he was going to rule. Now, very shortly after he assumes the throne, Henry is given his first great test. The French ambassador comes to the court and gives Henry a gift of tennis balls from the French Dauphin. And the Dauphin tells Henry that he should consume his time with sport and games and not bother with real leadership. Real leadership should be left to kings who were born to it. Suddenly, all eyes are on Henry. Everyone is looking to see who will respond. Will it be Prince Hal, the vagabond, wastrel, petty thief, or the man everyone wants him to be, King Henry V? Henry tells the French ambassador that not only will he be king, he will go to France, and he will be king of France as well. Tell the Dauphin We understand him well, how he comes o'er us with our wilder days, not measuring what use we made of them. We never valued this poor seat of England, and therefore living hence did give ourselves to barbarous license, as 'tis ever common that men are merriest when they're from home. But tell the pleasant prince, I will keep my state, be like a king, and show my sail of greatness when I do rouse me in my throne of France. And for that I have laid by my majesty, and plodded like a man of the working days. But I will rise there with so full a glory, that I will dazzle all the eyes of France, yea, strike the dolphin blind to look on us. Henry passed his first great test. On the inside, he was insecure. He wasn't sure what he was going to say. He'd never been put in this position. But he knew he had to model the way. He had to fake it until he became it. And he also knew that he had to put into the minds of his country a great vision of success. He had to visualize a happy future for him and his country. And that future is conquering France. And by continuing to model the way throughout the play, eventually he becomes that happy result. Now, the climax of the play is the Battle of Agincourt. And at the Battle of Agincourt, Henry's men, they're outnumbered 5-1. Henry's men are tired, they're hungry, they're riddled with disease, and they're facing a French foe that is rested and better armed. They're facing certain death. Once again, all eyes turn to Henry. What will he do? What will he say? Well, because Henry has been modeling the way consistently throughout this play, and because throughout the play there has been this great, beautiful vision of happiness and success conquering France, Henry has primed himself for this moment. No longer does he make a speech as the insecure, young, untested king who talked about tennis balls. He talks with a quiet authority. And he's able to instill in his men warmth, compassion. He tells them he understands that we're vastly outnumbered and the odds are not in our favor. But he reminds them that this story shall the good man teach his son, and Crispin Crispian shall ne'er go by from this day to the ending of the world, but we in shall be remembered. We few, we happy few, we band of brothers, for he today that sheds his blood with me shall be my brother. Henry inspires his men with an emotional appeal, and so they believe in that happy vision. Now, we know from quantum physics that if we expect a certain result, that result is likely to materialize. We also know from long-term brain studies that if we engage repeatedly in certain patterns of behavior, we produce long-term permanent changes in our brain. By envisioning his happy future and consistently modeling the way, even when he didn't feel like it, Henry becomes the man he wants to be. And it's not just the kings and the men. It happens a lot in Shakespeare's plays. Look at Rosalind, look at Portia, look at Juliet. So I'm going to tell you the great secret about how you can be like Henry V, how you can be like Rosalind, how you can experience massive change in your own life, how you can produce new pathways, make new connections in your brain. It's really simple. You should act Shakespeare. Do you want to lead your company, your family, your friends to great success against overwhelming odds? Then act Henry V. Act Henry V over and over and over again until you start to understand something about leadership from the inside. So when you encounter your own personal Agincourt, you are more equipped to deal with it. Your brain understands what you need to do, and you can respond accordingly. Do you want great love in your life? Even if your family and your society are against it, then act Juliet, act Rosalind over and over and over again until that moment comes when you find that great love and you have the courage and the bravery to seize the life you want for yourself. Now, there's been groundbreaking work with prisoners, especially in North America, and Shakespeare Behind Bars programs, rehabilitating lives and minds through the work of Shakespeare. We know that students, when they get up on their feet and they speak and they breathe and they live Shakespeare, they understand the works in a more deep, profound way. And that's what I'm asking you to do, to change your brain, to change your life, to change your community's lives, to understand yourself and understand the world by speaking Shakespeare. Your life will be better for it. I can promise you that because my life has been absolutely changed during the course of my 28-year relationship with William Shakespeare. Change your life, change the world. Speak Shakespeare. Thank you very much.
All right, that was wonderful. Speak Shakespeare. Feel it, be it, become it. All right. To lead or not to lead? So right here is an example of another theater. It's modern day, but this is designed like the theater of that time. This is from Thoughtco. Lifetime contemporary theater is very different for audiences. To fully appreciate Shakespeare, it's best to see his plays live on stage. It's a sad fact that today we're typically studying Shakespeare's out of books and forgo the live experience. What's important is to remember that the Bard is not writing for today's literary readership, but live audiences. There's different kinds of Shakespeares you can see, like Shakespeare in the park, Shakespeare at the beach. You know, there's different Shakespeares. He said there were Shakespeare's behind bars. So there's different places where Shakespeare takes place. Shakespeare's not writing for any live audience, but for writing for the masses of Elizabethan England, many of whom couldn't read or write, and the theater is usually the only place audiences of his plays would be exposed to fine literary culture. To better understand Shakespearean works, today's reader needs to go beyond the text themselves and consider the context of these works, the details of the live theater experience during Bard's lifetime. Theater etiquette in Shakespeare's time. Visiting a theater and watching a play in Elizabethan time was very different from today, not just because of whom was in the audience, but because of how people behaved. Theater goers weren't expected it to be still and silent through the performance as modern audiences are. Instead, Elizabethan theater was a modern equivalent to popular band concert. It was communal, even then at times rambunctious, depending on the subject matter of a given performance. Audiences could eat, drink, and talk throughout the performance. Theaters were open air and used natural light. With advanced technology or artificial life, most plays were performed not in the evening as they are today, but rather in the afternoon or during daylight. Furthermore, plays during the era used very little scenery and few, if any, props. The plays usually relied on language to set the scene. Female performance in Shakespeare's time. The laws for contemporary performances of Shakespeare's plays banned women from acting. Female roles were thus played by young boys before their voices changed to puberty. How Shakespeare changed perceptions of the theater. Shakespeare saw public's attitude toward theater shift during lifetime. Prior to this era, the England was considered disreputable pastime. It was frowned upon by Puritan authorities who were worried that it might distract people from their religious teachings. During the reign of Elizabeth I, theaters were banned within the city walls in London, even though the Queen enjoyed theater frequently, attended performances in person. But over time, theater became more popular and thriving entertainment scene. Oh my goodness. Know what that is. Blankshire was considered to be a den of iniquity in the brothels, bear baiting pitfalls, and theaters. The place of the theater in Shakespeare's time widely derived from its perceived role today as high culture reserved for educated upper classes. The acting profession during Shakespeare's time, Shakespeare's contemporary theater companies were extremely busy. They would perform around 6 different plays a week, which could only be rehearsed a few times before the performance. There's no separate stage crew and theater companies have today. Every actor and stagehand helped to make costumes, props, and scenery. The Elizabethan acting profession worked as apprentice system and therefore was strictly hierarchical. Playwrights themselves had to rise up against the ranks, and shareholders and general managers were in charge and profited the most from the company's success. Managers employed their actors who became permanent members of the company. Boy apprentices were at the bottom of the hierarchy, and they usually began their careers by acting in small roles or playing female characters. So before we continue reading about Shakespeare, we are going to take a little break. Oh, hold on, let me put a break song on. Go ahead and take your 15-minute break. When you come back, we'll continue to talk about Shakespeare. Hold on, to my favorite one on Chill August Sunday.
You have the best pizza in town and the worst wait times.
Table 4 up.
You need to hire.
I need Indeed.
Wait a minute, I think I left my conscience on your front doorstep. Whoa, wait a minute, I think I left my consciousness in the 6th dimension. But I'm here right now, just sitting in a cloud. Oh wow, I'm here right now with you. Oh wow. I don't even care. I'll run my hands through your hair. You wanna run your fingers through mine, but my dread's too thick, and that's alright. Hold on, wait a minute. Feel my heart's intention. Hold on, wait a minute. I left my consciousness in the 6th dimension. Left my soul in his vision. Let's go get it. Let's go get it. Some things don't work. Some things are bound to be. Some things they hurt and they tear apart me. You left your diary at my house, and I read those pages. Do you really love me, baby? Some things don't work. Some things are bound to be. Some things they hurt and they tear apart me. But I broke my word, and you were bound to see. And I cried at the curb where you first said, "Una tica me." Hold on, wait a minute. Feel my heart's intention. Hold on, wait a minute. I left my consciousness in the 6th dimension. Left my soul in his vision. Let's go get it. Let's go get it. Some people like to live. Some just trying to get by. Some people like that hurt. Some just rather say goodbye. Bye. Hold on, wait a minute. Feel my heart's intention. Hold on, wait a minute. I left my consciousness in the 6th dimension. Left my soul in his vision. Let's go get it. Let's go get it.
to someone else and rip their heart out. How would you feel if I said to you, that's how I feel? 'Cause I feel like I'm losing you. Oh, how can that be true? I know you want me to. Yeah, I feel like I'm losing you. Oh, how can that be true? I know you want me to. How could you lie to me time and time again? I'm getting tired of everything you say, but I want you anyway. Yeah, I feel like I'm losing you. Oh, how can that be true? I know you want me to. Yeah, I feel like I'm losing you. Oh, how can that be true? I know you want me to.
With IXL, not only does Charlie get extra math practice and guidance, but he's also able to explore other topics and skills he's interested in. So if you're wondering if IXL is right for your child, I would say don't wait. You'll see a difference right away.
Improve your kids' grades with perfectly matched tutors. Go Student Tutoring. That's the feeling of better grades. Book a free tutoring lesson at gostudent.org.
There is a girl in the lobby of a cheap hotel. She's got her eyes fixed on the floor. She is collecting pieces of the broken hearts of the people who were there before. And it's alright, everybody's on their own, lying wide awake at night. And it's alright, being far away from home, stuck between the neon lights. Do you want me to spend some time sitting next to you? Do you wonder why? Is there more than meets? Is there more than meets the eye? There is a boy in the corner of a coffee shop. He's got his eyes fixed on the screen. He's taking pictures of his empty cup like it's the cover of a magazine. And it's alright, everybody's on their own, pretending everything's fine. Yeah, it's alright that you're sleeping with your phone. The static makes you wonder why. Do you want me to spend some time sitting next to you? Do you wonder why? Is there more than meets? Is there more than meets the eye? Is there more than meets the eye? Is there more than meets? Is there more than meets the eye? Is there more than meets the eye? Is there more than meets the eye?
What's wrong? You've been asking, but I don't have an answer. How come? I'm still thinking, let's pretend to fall asleep now. When we get old, will we regret this? Too young to think about all that shit. And stalling only goes so far when you've got a head start. 'Cause we could stay at home and watch the sunset, but I get up from asking, are you bored yet? And if you're feeling lonely, you should tell me before this ends up as another memory. Will you tell the truth so I don't have to lie? Will you tell the truth so I don't have to lie?
Feels like I've known you my whole life. I can see right through your lies. I don't know where we're going, but I like to be by your side. If you could tell me how you're feeling, maybe we get through this undefeated. Holding on for so long.
'Cause we could stay at home and watch the sunset, but I can't help from asking, are you bored yet? And if you're feeling lonely, you should tell me before this ends up as another memory. Will you tell the truth so I don't have to lie? Will you tell the truth so I don't have to lie?
Next to Hudson Yards, it's crowded on the weekdays from April to May. Parse apart a troubled heart from any train. Sing about it in LA. And clouds in the rear view, you start humming along to the first verse of your favorite song that you quote each day with the words all wrong. So call me when the world
Okay, I love this calming songs. So that's about Shakespeare. That's weird. We're reading Shakespeare, and all of a sudden these cargo pants showed up. That's weird. So here's some facts about Shakespeare. And facts about Shakespeare can sometimes be hard to find. So to help sort the fact with the speculation, we put together a Shakespeare crib sheet. And this is a single reference page packed with facts and only facts about Shakespeare. The links were here for you to dive deeper into the subject. The key facts about Shakespeare. William Shakespeare was born April 23rd, 1564. He died April 23rd, 1616. The dates above were appropriate because there's no record of neither his birth nor his death. We only have records of his baptism and burial. We accept the dates. Shakespeare was born and died the same day. In fact, Shakespeare's death occurred on his 52nd birthday. Facts about Shakespeare's life. Shakespeare was born and raised in Stratford-upon-Avon, but later moved to London for his work. Shakespeare had 3 children and his wife, Anne Hathaway. When he left for London, Shakespeare left the family behind in Stratford. He did, however, retire back in Stratford at the end of his career. There is evidence that Shakespeare was a secret Catholic. By the end of his life, Shakespeare was a wealthy gentleman and had a coat of arms. His final residence was New Palace, the largest house in Stratford-upon-Avon. Shakespeare was buried inside Holy Trinity Church in Stratford. Shakespeare's grave has a curse engraved on it. Shakespeare's birthday is celebrated worldwide every year. The main festival is Stratford-upon-Avon and St. George's Day. Facts about Shakespeare's time. Shakespeare was not one-of-a-kind genius, as many people would have you believe. Rather, he was a product of his time. Shakespeare grew up during the Renaissance. Queen Elizabeth I ruled much of Shakespeare's life, and she would sometimes come and watch his plays. Facts about Shakespeare's plays. Shakespeare wrote 38 plays. Shakespeare's plays are split into 3 genres: tragedy, comedy, history. Hamlet is regarded as Bard's best play. Romeo and Juliet is regarded as Bard's famous play. Shakespeare has co-authored many of his plays. Facts about Shakespeare's sonnets. Shakespeare wrote 157 sonnets. The sonnets are split into sections. The first follows the fair youth, and the second follows so-called dark lady. It is likely that the sonnets were never intended for publication. Sonnet 18 is regarded as Shakespeare's most famous sonnet. Shakespeare's sonnets are written in a strict poetic meter called iambic parameter and has 14 lines each. Facts about Shakespeare's theater. Shakespeare's experience in Shakespeare's time was different from today. Crowds could eat and drink and talk, and the production plays were performed open air. The Global Theater was made with materials of stolen theater that Shakespeare's theater company dismantled at midnight and floated across the Thames River. Shakespeare described the Globe Theater as wooden O because of its shape. The original Globe Theater was demolished to make way for tenements in 1644, who fell out of the use. The building currently stands in London as a replica built from the traditional materials and techniques. It's not original site, but it's close to it. And today, Royal Shakespeare Company, RSC, is the world's leading producer of Shakespeare and headquartered in Bard's hometown of Stratford-upon-Avon. So that was Shakespeare. So this right here is Othello, work by Shakespeare. Hear about the 3 language devices in Shakespeare's Othello. Words is power, words is character, and words is conversation with the audience. Here's some different scenes from Othello.
William Shakespeare wrote Othello sometime around 1603, during a period of creativity that also gave us As You Like It, Hamlet, King Lear, and Macbeth. In each of those plays, Shakespeare explored the power of language and the ways in which words create characters' identities and shape their fates. Words also affect how we, the audience, feel about the characters by asking us for a response. Words drive the plot. Language is powerful, and Shakespeare was very specific about his choice of words. For example, let's look at 3 language devices Shakespeare uses in Othello: words as power, words as character, and words as a conversation with the audience.
Beware, my lord, of jealousy.
Language is going to be important in any play, but I think language is particularly significant in the world of Othello. The first thing we realize is that language is power, and it is not just power for Iago. At the start of the play, Othello is very clear about how he and Desdemona fell in love, and it's a love that happens through language, through the stories that Othello tells.
My story being done, she gave me for my pains a world of sighs. She swore if faith 'twas strange, 'twas passing strange, 'twas pitiful, 'twas wondrous pitiful. She wished she had not heard it, yet she wished that heaven had made her such a man.
That is a positive power of language. But then when you put that powerful tool in a villain's hands, it's absolutely corrupt. Iago manages to do most of the evil that he does with the word. And it's not always big dramatic moments like beware, my lord, of jealousy. It is the green-eyed monster, which is a fabulous dramatic moment, but that's not how it begins. It begins much more subtly with, I like not that.
I heard thee say even now, thou likest not that when Cassio left my wife. What didst not like? And when I told thee he was of my counsel in my whole course of wooing, thou criedst, indeed? If thou dost love me, show me thy thought.
My lord, you know I love you.
I think thou dost. And for I know thou art full of love and honesty, and weighst thy words before thou givest them breath. Therefore these stops of thine fright me the more.
For Michael Cassio, I dare be sworn, I think that he is honest.
I think so too.
Men should be what they seem.
Yet there's more in this.
So that he's getting Othello's backup. He's making him feel even more vulnerable with those sort of subtle little hints.
Utter my thoughts.
Iago is a kind of master of language in that way.
If him wrong, then makes his ear a stranger to thy thoughts.
And I think that's what makes this play so fascinating and also so frightening. We see what a few words can do to deceive and to destroy.
Words are power. And in a play where words create the entire world, characters that don't talk much are struggling for a voice.
Emilia and Desdemona both realize way too late what has been happening. Women just have less information in that time period. They're able to do less, they have less education, they're not allowed to go in public as much, unescorted. Women are always fighting in Shakespeare and in Shakespeare's time to have a larger voice.
Women's speech is really quite problematic in the Renaissance, and that's because women were instructed to be chaste, to be silent, and to be obedient. Those were the prescriptions for a virtuous woman.
The more Desdemona speaks about Cassio, the more Othello thinks she is unfaithful. But we also see women's speech as power.
One of my favorite things is how essential it is for Emilia to speak at the end of the play. When we're in that bedroom and we see Desdemona's dead body, and Emilia enters, and Othello presents all of the information to Emilia and to the other men who enter the room. He had my wife's handkerchief. Emilia understands how that handkerchief came in Cassio's possession. She is the only person who can solve this problem for us. So the audience is dying for Emilia to speak, and she draws attention to her own speech. She says, "It will out, I will speak as liberally as the North." And of course, Iago is actually going to call her a whore for that.
Oh, thou dull Moor! That handkerchief thou speak'st of I found by fortune and did give my husband. For often with a solemn earnestness, more than indeed belonged to such a trifle, he begged of me to steal it.
Villainous whore!
She give it Cassio, no! Alas, I found it, and I did give my husband.
Filth, thou liest!
By heaven, I do not! I do not, gentlemen.
Emilia is killed for speaking the truth. One of the ideas Shakespeare is exploring in Othello is the ability for language to both express and to hide truth. Othello is tricked not by deeds, but by the clever manipulation of words. Desdemona dies because of words spoken about her. And Iago tells us directly that his lies are merely free and honest advice.
I dare be sworn, I think that he is honest.
And speaking of honest, that word appears over and over in this play. Now, in the Renaissance, the word honest meant different things for men and for women. For men, honest meant someone who's trustworthy. It refers to honor and loyalty. For women, the word honest was primarily referring to chastity. Now in this play, honest is used around 50 times, and about half of those times it is referring to Iago.
Honest Iago. Yes, the villain is referred to as honest in this play, which is certainly ironic.
Honest Iago. Oh, my fellow honest Iago. Iago, he's so honest. What an honest fellow Iago is. It's relentless. It's really relentless.
That Iago is loyal, that Iago is a man of his word, that Iago is trustworthy. And Othello wants to believe he's honest, and I think that's why he keeps calling him honest Iago.
Iago is not only honest, truthful, he has a certain goodness of character. Desdemona truly believes that of him.
There's not a single person on the stage that doesn't think that Iago is a forthright, honest, trustworthy character.
The word honesty in Othello is used so frequently, even Iago uses it when referring to Cassio, and I think everyone else thinks it's a wonderful thing. Honesty is the first thing. You're honest with yourself, you're honest with your God, and you're honest with your friends. I don't think Iago's interested in that, because when he refers to Cassio as an honest fool, I think the honest is just as damning as the fool part.
For whilst this honest fool plies Desdemona to repair his fortunes, and she, for him, pleads strongly to the Moor.
There is another repetitive word used to describe a character, this time in reference to Othello.
The word Moor is almost used in place of a name for Othello throughout the whole first half of the play. They say the more this, the more approaches. Here comes the Moor, and that in using a label like that serves to reduce somebody's identity even further. Gives them the sense of the other, something that's different, makes him an outsider.
In the title of the play, Othello, the Moor of Venice, yes, I think that he is identified as an outsider right from the get-go because, you know, Venice didn't have Moors. Her father loved me, oft invited me, still questioned me, the story of my life from year to year. Immediately says, well, this is a story about a man from another part of the world, living in another part of the world. He is a former slave turned general, which is unique. He is a former Muslim turned Christian, which is unique. He is a solitary man up until the time he marries Desdemona, which is also unique in a time where all these men would have wives. So there are many things that make Othello other than just race. And I think that is what makes this play so interesting to do over and over again, because you can unravel so many layers of it.
It is here, but yet confused.
Through the use of soliloquy, the characters talk directly to the audience, sharing their plots, motives, and innermost thoughts, which they keep secret from the other characters on stage.
There is no deception in Shakespeare unless the character says, I'm going to be deceptive now. Because Shakespeare wrote people to say exactly what they were doing.
What's so interesting about the way that Shakespeare uses deception in the play Othello, especially through the medium of Iago, is that the audience for the play are one step ahead of the characters in the play. Iago says very directly, either to the audience, I'm going to go do some deception right now, or to Rodrigo, he'll say, hey, listen, here's this way we're going to deceive other people. Are you on board?
Love me.
He opens that game to the audience. And what's so unnerving here is that we immediately become collaborators with Iago, whether we like it or not, because we're his best friend. He starts talking to us immediately. We kind of like him. He makes us laugh. He's very funny. And then when he's stuck, he asks us for help.
How am I then a villain to counsel Cassio to this parallel course directly to his own good?
The journey has to be to get the audience on your side, so at the end, they're complicit in the acts that have occurred. They haven't stopped anything. At the end, the audience should feel a little violated, a little dirty, a little bit part of the action.
The play Othello shows just how powerful words can be. All of the damage done to the characters in the play begins with language. And it's no accident that Iago, one of Shakespeare's greatest villains, doesn't meet his end like any of the other villains.
He silences him, Shakespeare does, but I think it becomes more tragic if there is no comeuppance for the villain.
Will you, I pray, demand that demi-devil why he hath thus ensnared my soul and body?
Demand me nothing. What you know.
From this time forth, I never will speak word.
Okay, so that was from Othello from the Folger Theater season 2011-12. So that was pre-COVID. So Othello and Full Othello of Moor of Venice, tragedy 5 acts of William Shakespeare. Written in 1603 to 1604, published in 1622 in a quarto edition of the transcript of the authoritative manuscript. The text, published first folio in 1623, seems to have been base version of revised Shakespeare himself, but sticks close to the original almost line by line, but introduces numerous substitutes of words and phrases, as though Shakespeare copied it himself and rewrote the copied. The play derives the plot from Givraj di Galli Hamachi in 1565, which Shakespeare appears to have been known in the Italian original. It was available to him in French, but not translated in English. There's another version of it right here, a picture. Paul Robinson Wright of Othello and Uta Hagen is Desdemona in the Theatre of Gold production of William Shakespeare Othello, performed in the Broadway 1943-44. The play sets forth in motion with Othello, a heroic black general in service of Venice, appoints Cassio and Lago and the chief lieutenant, jealous of Othello's success in Van Viscasio, about plots to Othello's downfall by falsely implicating Othello's wife Demonia in Cassio's love affair. With the unwitting aid of Emilia, his wife, and willing help of Rodrigo, a fellow merchant, Adio carries out his plan.
Most potent, grave, and reverend seniors, my very noble and approved good masters,
The picture.
that I have ta'en away this old
Broadway
man's daughter.
1943-44.
It is most true. True, I have married her. The very head and front of my offending hath this extent, no more. Rude am I in my speech, and little blessed with the soft phrase of peace. For since these arms of mine had 7 years' pith, till now some 9 moons wasted, they have used their dearest action in the tented field. And little of this great world can I speak, more than pertains to feats of broils and battle, and therefore little shall I grace my cause by speaking for myself. Yet, by your gracious patience, I will a round unvarnished tale deliver of my whole course of love. What drugs, what charms, what conjurations, and what mighty magic. For such proceeding I am charged with all. I won his daughter.
Some more pictures. This one's Lawrence Fishburne in the title role Othello. This was in 1995. Here's the playbill for performance of Othello and other works at the Theatre Royal in Haymarket, London. Here's Othello, played by Lawrence Fishburne, with Irene Jacob on the left, Desdemona and Kenneth Bragg on the right as Lago, 1995. This is another version in 1955. Audrey Profo on the Lago on the left, and Rodrigo Sergi Udovic's Othello. And this is another version, Paul Robertson Wright in the title role Othello, Peggy Ashros as Desdemona. There's a painting, Ira Frederick, Aldridge as Othello, painting by Henry Perrott Briggs, 1830, at the National Portrait Gallery. And then we listened to this already. Othello defends himself and married Desdemona. This was in 1930. Oops, I'm sorry. I clicked out by accident. Okay. Here's a person discussing Othello. Learn about the characters of Othello as discussed by a cast and crew member.
What's he then that says I play the villain?
There's a few ways to think about Iago, and probably one of the most prominent is to say he's the devil.
When devils will the blackest sins put on, they do at first with heavenly shows, as I do now.
And his purpose in this world is to create as much pain and do as much evil as he possibly can. That is a show of power.
He has excuses that he has to tell himself that that's why he's doing this.
For that I do suspect the lusty Moor hath leaped into my seat, the thought whereof doth like a poisonous mineral gnaw my inwards, and nothing can nor shall content my soul till I am evened with him, wife for wife.
But I think he's just a psychopath.
I like the idea of thinking of this as a kind of chess game that Iago plays with himself, because this really does become a game to him.
Rodrigo is very definitively a pawn in that match.
You sacrifice your pawns in order to get your king at the end of the day.
As far as the way that he gets used, Rodrigo actually isn't a bad pawn.
I think Rodrigo is used in the play to accomplish a number of things. First, he is a really easy person to manipulate.
Oh, no, Lieutenant!
So he helps Iago get money, he helps Iago get Cassio, and he also provides a lot of comic relief. And Shakespeare likes to include a lot of comedy in the tragedies.
Rodrigo is this sort of wealthy, slightly ineffective noble. He's just sort of madly, crazily in love with Desdemona, who doesn't even recognize that Rodrigo exists, which makes it that much more horrifying and tragic that Iago ultimately kills Rodrigo.
The game he plays with Rodrigo sort of foreshadows the game he's going to play with Othello, but the stakes are much higher with Othello. Othello is the king, and the end game is to topple the king.
Oh, beware, my lord, of jealousy. It is the green-eyed monster that doth mock the meat it feeds on.
Jealousy. Jealousy is great. Shakespeare is brilliant, and the reason we're still doing his plays 400 plus years later is because he writes about basic human emotion. There was jealousy back then, there's been jealousy through the ages, there's jealousy now.
What's interesting to me about the jealousy in Othello is that it's totally driven by deceit. We see Iago totally destroy the love between Othello and Desdemona.
I'll pour this pestilence into his ear, that she repeals Cassio for her body's lust.
Othello is so easily deceived because he's insecure. I mean, I think Desdemona is probably the first woman that he's actually loved, and they've just gotten married.
He's new to the whole love game. Iago rightly figures out he'll be new to the whole jealousy game, and it will take him down.
One of the big questions people ask about Othello is why does his mind change so quickly? Othello is very much an outsider. He's sort of different culturally from everybody else, and that's a big part of why he ends up walking down the path that he does in this play.
Deception is something fierce. His pride and his confidence are completely gone by the end.
I think Othello would describe himself as a hard worker. He is honest. He believes the best in people and trusts that people will hold up their side of the bargain, their honor, and so he does the same. Everything about Othello that makes him who he is comes into question. And the fact that he is someone of other ilk ultimately makes you insecure no matter what, no matter how successful you are.
And it helps to get rid of the queen.
Desdemona is completely out of her element, and she loves Othello, and I think she believes so strongly in that love. But she's in this foreign place. Everybody starts behaving strangely, and so she's vulnerable. Everybody's vulnerable.
Emilia, she loves Iago and had at one time felt like they were in a loving relationship. At the beginning of the play, they're in a rough patch. But I think that Emilia thinks that it's all going to work out. And part of that is her showing him the handkerchief.
What I think is really interesting about the play is he doesn't really know what he's going to do. He even has a speech where he says, "'Tis here, but yet confused." He doesn't quite know what his plan is. And these things keep falling in his lap.
Desdemona does tell a little white lie, and does not tell Othello that she has lost the handkerchief.
I have assault, and sorry room offends me. Lend me thy handkerchief,
Here, my lord.
that which I gave you.
I have it not about me.
No,
No, indeed, my lord.
that's a fault.
She says, well, I don't have it right now, which is true. She's not lying so much as protecting her honor, because after he tells her the story about the significance of the handkerchief,
That handkerchief did an Egyptian to my mother give. She was a charmer and could almost read the thoughts of people. She told her, while she kept it, 'twould make her amiable and subdue my father entirely to her love. But if she lost it, or made a gift of it, my father's eye should hold her loathed, and his spirits should hunt after new fancies. She, dying, gave it me, and bid me when my fate would have me wived to give it her. I did so, and take heed on't. Make it a darling like your precious eye.
and she realizes that, oh my God, if I did really lose this handkerchief, this could be really bad. So she decides to stall by saying, well, I don't know where, it's not here now, but I'll get it later.
It's gone? Speak! Is that the way?
Heaven bless us!
Say you.
It is not lost. But what if it were?
How?
I say it is not lost.
Fetch, let me see it.
Why, so I can, but I will not now.
Desdemona not being 100% honest with Othello about the handkerchief kind of is what leads the play to unravel. It plants a seed in Othello's head that maybe she did lose the handkerchief, or maybe she did give it to Cassio like Iago said she did.
The great failing, and it's the first time in the entire play, is when he fails to take out Cassio the knight in shining armor. He fails to take him out, and that is the end of Iago.
When we're in that bedroom and we see Desdemona's dead body, and Emilia enters, and Othello presents all of the information to Emilia and to the other men who enter the room, he had my wife's handkerchief. Emilia understands how that handkerchief came in Cassio's possession. She is the only person who can solve this problem for us.
That handkerchief thou speakst of, I found by fortune and did give my husband. For often with a solemn earnestness, he begged of me to steal it. She give it Cassio, no. Alas, I found it, and I did give my husband.
Filth, thou liest!
By heaven, I do not. I do not, gentlemen.
Final scene when he's in there and Emilia's giving him hell, it's the first time he's quiet. And Shakespeare does not give Iago a lot of lines, because he knows he's trapped. He is madly thinking of a way out of this corner, how to get back in this chess game. And so what he does is he sort of has a suicide mission and allows himself to be caught, but takes everybody down with him.
In most of the tragedies, we get to enjoy the villain's death, but not so here. And not only does he not die, but Shakespeare draws attention to it. Iago says, stabbed, but not killed. And Othello announces, well, if you're the devil, I can't kill you.
He kills him, though, in a sense, because he's the second largest part in all of Shakespeare. And he says, his last line is, from this time forth, I never will speak word. So in a sense, Shakespeare kills him.
You cannot kill the devil, which means you can't get rid of evil in this world. And I think that's the point. Iago is allowed to stay alive because evil still exists in the world.
That's deep. Okay. Now you're inspired to watch Othello, or if you don't have access to the book, which we all have access to the book because it is a ebook now. So making use of the handkerchief belonged to Desdemona and found by Emilia when Othello's unwillingly dropped it. Anaio persuades Othello that Desdemona has given the handkerchief to Cassio and the love token, and he also introduces Othello to eavesdrop on the conversation between himself and Cassio. That's in fact it, Cassio's mistress, Bianca. which Othello's also led to concerns of Cassio's infatuation with Desdemona. Slender proofs confirm that Othello has been all too inclined to believe. And the older black man, he's much no longer attracted to his white Venetian wife. Overcome with jealousy, Othello kills Desdemona. When he learns of Emilia too late, his wife is blameless, and he asks to be remembered as one who loved not wisely, but kills himself. It's Othello. One of the actresses. What was William Shakespeare's family like? As we said earlier, he was married to Anne Hathaway, 8 years his senior. He was 18. So 8 years his senior. That means she's 8 years older than him. He was 18, she was 26. They had 3 children, Susanna, twins Judith, and Hamlet died at age 11. And we talked about that earlier, about Hamlet, they thought was related to Hamnet. How many plays did he write? There's a dispute of how many plays he wrote, but general consensus is about 37. And how many sonnets did Shakespeare write? He wrote 154 sonnets. The most famous is Sonnet 18 with opening lines, "Shall I compare thee to a summer's day?" And Sonnet 130, which begins, "My mistress' eyes are nothing like the sun." Oops. How did he die? The cause of Shakespeare's death is unknown. However, a vicar of the local church wrote in his journal 50 years later that Shakespeare, Dryden, and Ben Jonson had a merry meeting and it seemed to drink too hard. For Shakespeare died of a fever there contracted. The account can be verified, but has some scholars to speculate Shakespeare may have died of typhus. I'm sorry, I didn't read this one. Shakespeare remains vital because his plays represent people and situations that we have recognized today. His characters have an emotional reality that transcends time, and his plays depict familiar experiences, ranging from family squabbles to falling in love to war. The fact that his plays are performed and adapted around the world underscores the universal appeal to storytelling. So here's fun and creative ways to celebrate Shakespeare's birthday. As I mentioned earlier, you can go to Shakespeare at the Park, Shakespeare at the beach. I know in California they have some of the Shakespeares at the park. They had one, I remember, at Garden Grove Park. And I knew a girl that did Shakespeare at the beach in Long Beach, but I don't know if they still do that anymore. That was pre-COVID. I saw King Lear at the Garden Grove one with students before. Shakespeare was born and died April 23rd. In over 400 years, we still are celebrating his birthday. Joining up with the Bard Birthday Bash is the best way to celebrate. But if you're unable to attend an event, throw your own party. Here are some creative ways to celebrate Shakespeare's birthday. We can visit Stratford-upon-Avon if you live in the UK or visiting the area for a month in April. There's no better place in the world to celebrate William Shakespeare's birthday than his hometown of Stratford-upon-Avon. In the weekend of his birthday, the little market town of Worcester pulls out all of the stops. Hundreds of people travel to the town and line in the street to watch the town disparages. Community groups, RSC, celebrates Mark of Bard's birthday to starting the parade in Henley Street, where the Shakespeare birthplace dress can be found. They then snake their way through the streets of the town of Holy Trinity Church, the Bard's final resting place. The town then spends a weekend and most of the week entertaining visitors with street performance, RSC workshops, and world-class theater and free community theater. Performance scene. If you can't make it to Stratford upon Avon or one of the other Shakespeare birthday events happening around the world, then why not throw your own party? Dust off that old Shakespeare tone and act in your own favorite scene. Couples can try famous balcony scenes from Romeo and Juliet, where the entire family can attempt the tragic ending of Hamlet. Remember, Shakespeare didn't write his plays to be read, they were to be performed. So get to the spirit and start acting. Read a sonnet. Shakespeare's sonnets are some of English literature's most beautiful poetry. It's a delight to read aloud. Ask everyone in the celebration to find a sonnet that they like and read it to the group. If you're not sure how to do the justice of Shakespeare's work by reading it aloud, then I have some advice to make your performance sparkle. Visit the Globe. This might be difficult if you don't live near London or plan to be there, but it's possible to build your own global theater and keep the family entertained all afternoon. Print out the parts that you need to reconstruct Shakespeare's wooden O. You could also take a virtual photo tour of the reconstructed Global Theater in London. Watch out for a Branch Farm film. Kenneth Barge made some of the cinema's best Shakespeare film adaptations. Much Ado About Nothing is arguably his most upbeat celebrity film, the perfect flick around the Bard's birthday bash. There's other films too, like Midnight Summer. You can watch the old Romeo and Juliet. That one's fun, especially with Leonardo DiCaprio. I was a big Leonardo DiCaprio fan. This is where he was born. There's no secret that William Shakespeare is from England, but much of his fans would be really pressed to name exactly where in the country the writer was from. But this overview, discover where the Bard was born, and why the birthplace remains a tourist attraction today. Shakespeare was born in 1564 into a prosperous family at Stratford upon Avon in Warwickshire, England. The town's about 100 miles northwest in London. Although there's no record of his birth, it was presumed that he was born April 23rd because he was entered into the baptism register of Holy Trinity Church shortly after. Shakespeare's father, John, owned a large family house in the town center that is thought to be Bard's birthplace. The public can still visit the very room in which he believes Shakespeare was born. The house sits on Henley Street, the main road that runs through the middle of the small market town. It's well preserved and is open to the public via the visitor center. Inside, you can see how small the living space is for young Shakespeare. And how the family would have lived, cooked, and slept. One room has been at William Shakespeare's workroom, where he have tailored the gloves to sell. Shakespeare is expected to take over his father's business one day at a time. Shakespeare pilgrimage. For centuries, Shakespeare's birthplace has been a place of pilgrimage for literary minded. The tradition started in 1769, and David Carnegie, famous Shakespearean actor, he organized the first Shakespeare festival for Stratford upon Avon. Since then, the house had been visited with scores of famous writers, including John Keats, 1817, Sir Walter Scott, 1821, Charles Dickens, 1838, Mark Twain, 1873, and Thomas Hardy in 1896. They used diamond rings to scratch their names into the glass window of the birth room. The window has been since replaced, but the original glass panes are still on display. Thousands of people every year continue to follow the tradition and visit Shakespeare's birthplace, so the house remains on Stratford upon Avon's busiest attractions. Indeed, the house marks the starting point of the annual parade, walked by local officials, celebrities, and community groups each year as part of Shakespeare's birthday celebrations. The symbolic walk starts on Henley Street and ends at Holy Trinity Church, the burial place. There's no specific recorded date of death, but the date of the burial indicates he died April 23rd. Yes, Shakespeare was born and died in the same year. Participants of the parade pin a sprig of the herb rosemary to the outfits of the commentary of his life. This reference of Ophel's line in Hamlet, "There's rosemary," that's resemblance. Preserving the birthplace as a national memorial. When the birthplace last private occupant died, money was raised to committee to buy a house at auction and preserve it as a national memorial. The campaign gained momentum when rumors spread about P.T. Barnum. The American circus owner wanted to buy the house and ship it to New York. The money was raised successfully in the house in the hands of Shakespeare Birthplace Trust. The trust subsequently brought over Shakespeare-related properties in it and around Stratford upon Avon, including his mother's farmhouse, his daughter's townhouse, and his wife's family house in nearby Shottery. They also had the land where Shakespeare's final home in the town was stood. Today, Shakespeare's birth house has preserved and converted into a museum as part of a larger visitor complex. It is open to the public all year. And this is his final home. New place, Shakespeare's final home. When Shakespeare retired from London in 1610, he spent a few years in his life in New Palace, one of Stratford upon Avon's largest houses, which he purchased in 1597. Unlike Shakespeare's birthplace in Henley Street, New Palace was pulled down by the 18th century. Today, Shakespeare's fans can still visit the site of the house, which is now turned into Elizabethan Garden. Nash House, the building next door, still remains and serves as a museum dedicated to Tudor life and New Palace. Both sites were cared for by Shakespeare Birthplace Trust. New Place. New Place, once described as a pretty house of brick and timber, was built towards the end of the 15th century and brought by Shakespeare in 1597, although he did not live there until retirement from London in 1610. On display in the adjoining museum at the sketch of Palace of George Venter, showing the main house where Shakespeare lived, enclosed by a courtyard. These street-facing buildings would have been servants' quarters. Francis Grestell, the new place was demolished and rebuilt in 1702 by a new owner. The house was rebuilt by brick and stone and still survived by 57 years. A new owner, Reverend Francis Gazel, porter with the town authority over taxation, and Gazel had the house permanently demolished in 1759. New Palace was never again rebuilt, and only the foundation of the house remained. Shakespeare's mulberry tree. Gazel also caused controversy when he removed Shakespeare's mulberry tree. It was said that Shakespeare planted a mulberry tree in the gardens of New Palace, which posthumously attracted visitors. Gazel complained that he made the house damp and it had chopped the firewood, or perhaps Gazel wanted to deter the visitors. Thomas Sharpe, an entertaining local clockmaker and carpenter, bought most of the wood and carved Shakespeare mementos on it, and the museum in Nash House displays some of the artifacts that have been seen from Shakespeare's mulberry tree. Wow, that's great. All right, our last video is the TED Talk about Shakespeare communication and connecting to each other.
Hey, are you aware of this secret mental hack that can save your marriage and turn you back into that dream, us against the world?
An actor from Los Angeles walks into a working class bar in the Midwest and strikes up a conversation with two factory workers. The intellectual urban elite meets middle America on a bar stool. What happens? In this case, and this is a true story from Winona, Minnesota, our actor convinces the two factory workers to come see The Winter's Tale at the Great River Shakespeare Festival. Now, I don't know if The Winter's Tale is the ideal choice for someone that has never seen a play by Shakespeare before, but that's what they see. And the next night in the bar, they talk about jealousy. What does it feel like when you're jealous of your wife? How do you get stuck in that feeling, and how do you get back out? Looked at from the outside, these three men appear to have nothing in common, and yet here they are having an intimate conversation. They're discovering each other's humanity. They are learning about themselves from an unexpected source. They are building a community. Why did that happen? It would be easy enough for me to say that these are just three unique individuals, and that would be true. But I'm going to also suggest that encountering a great work of art, like a play by William Shakespeare, encourages us to explore the world in a different way. It invites us to be truly present in the moment. That experience causes us to think differently. I'd like to give you a little taste of why that's true, and I would like to do it using one sonnet by William Shakespeare. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Now, a sonnet starts with a thesis statement. So I know what you're thinking. Thesis statement, that's high school English, the 5-paragraph essay. Thesis statement, 3 paragraphs to explain it, and then a conclusion. I tell you what I think, I give you 3 reasons why I think, and then I tell you what I think. That is not what a sonnet is. A 5-paragraph essay encourages you to state your belief and then dig in your heels and defend it. A sonnet is an exploration of an idea that allows not just the possibility of change, but in its very structure assumes that something will be different at the end than at the beginning. A 5-paragraph essay is a report on having grappled with an idea in the past. A sonnet is the exploration itself. Shakespeare writes the way we speak. More importantly, he writes the way we think. One idea follows the next. So, a sonnet begins with a question. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? When we work on Shakespeare, we often paraphrase to uncover what we might have missed. I can't tell you how many times I've heard that sentence paraphrased as, "You are more beautiful than a summer's day." We are so used to hearing definite statements that sometimes we miss the question. And when we miss the question, we miss the opportunity to explore. We miss the opportunity to discover. We miss the possibility of change. That is a question with more than one answer. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Oh, definitely not. And then we wouldn't get the sonnet. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Yes. Yes, I will. But if I'm William Shakespeare, I'm going to make that comparison as honestly and as completely as I can. Thou art more lovely and more temperate. All right, Shakespeare wrote sonnets to get girls, or boys, or both. We don't actually know. So I understand lovely, but temperate? I love my wife, but when I say, honey, you are not super exciting, but you're not totally boring either. You are right there in the middle. You are that tepid cup of tea. You are temperate. It's an honest comparison. You are more temperate than a summer's day, but in our honesty, we have accidentally uncovered what we truly believe about the world, and we've offended the person that we love. That is a question with more than one answer. Shall I compare the, that is a question that every line of verse presents a problem that is answered by the next line of verse. Every line of verse is the opportunity for a discovery that creates the opportunity for the next discovery. Every line of verse is a question. Temperate, rough winds do shake the darling buds of May. If you've got the buds in May and a storm comes along and blows them off, you don't get the fruit. It is a good thing to be temperate, but that creates its own question. May, why are you talking about May? Because summer's lease hath all too short a date. There isn't time for another bud to grow. Shakespeare is one of the great writers in the English language, but he made as much or more of his money from real estate. So Shakespeare understands what a lease is. You don't own something you lease. You'll get to borrow it, but you don't even get to borrow it for as long as you want. It is a contract with an end date. You will lose it someday. Now that's going to create another problem that we'll deal with in just a minute. Sometime too hot the eye of heaven shines, So the eye of heaven is the sun sometime, not grammatically correct in Shakespeare's time, but we're talking about the idea of time. Sometime too hot the eye of heaven shines, and often is his gold complexion dimmed. Well, they certainly understand fog in London. And every fair from fair sometime declines. Fair is a tricky word. In Shakespeare's time, when applied to a woman, it means she is beautiful because her skin is of a light color. Now, that is obviously racist and sexist, but fair is also a bigger word than that. A law can be fair. The winds can be fair. Our price can be fair. We can have fair companions. Fair is that quality in anything that makes it worthy of love. We love a fair law because it's just. Fair winds carry us to our destination quickly but without destroying us. We love a fair price because it's good for both sides. Our companions are fair when they are generous and engaging. And when applied to a woman or a man, it means someone who is gracious and truthful, someone who is worthy of our love. Shakespeare loved. But just 7 lines into a poem about a summer's day, following one thought to another, he has accidentally uncovered one of our greatest existential fears. Everything we love will die. Everything we love will disappear from this world. Every fair from fair sometime declines by chance or nature's changing course untrimmed, and Shakespeare cannot stand it. But neither can the sonnet. In its very structure, it assumes that something will be different at the end than at the beginning, and we have arrived at what we call the turn. But thy eternal summer shall not fade, nor lose possession of that fair thou owest, nor shall death brag, thou wanderest in his shade. Okay, now wait a minute, Shakespeare. Everything dies. That is the nature of reality. There is no other possibility. But Shakespeare has explored the question fully, completely, honestly. And when he is left with no possible solution that he can accept, he has no choice but to attempt the impossible. When in eternal lines to time thou growest. The eternal lines of a poem. So I'm William Shakespeare. I haven't written my most famous plays yet. I'm a somewhat well-known playwright, but the theaters are closed because of the plague, so I'm wandering around the countryside trying to make ends meet, and I am in love, and I cannot stand that that love will disappear from the world. So I say, I know, I will write a poem. And when this poem is spoken out loud, the love that I feel will live in this world for one more minute, and people will speak this poem forever. It is an impossible plan, except that it worked. We breathe in order to live. For the Elizabethans, when we breathe back out in order to speak language, that is our life force going out in the world. Because we are breathing to speak and to hear this poem today, the love that Shakespeare felt 400 years ago lives in this room for one more minute. We don't know who this poem was written to. We don't know if it was a man or a woman, but we know that Shakespeare loved. And we know that like any of us that have truly and deeply loved, he cannot stand that that love would disappear from the world. But we know that everything dies. That is the nature of reality. But Shakespeare is an artist. And an artist doesn't always care about the nature of reality. And sometimes, in the moment-to-moment exploration of the world, an unexpected solution presents itself. Maybe, just maybe, a poem can defy death itself. Maybe the impossible can become possible. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Thou art more lovely and more temperate. Rough winds do shake the darling buds of May, and summer's lease hath all too short a date. Sometime too hot the eye of heaven shines, and often is his gold complexion dimmed, and every fair from fair sometime declines, by chance or nature's changing course untrimmed. But thy eternal summer shall not fade, nor lose possession of that fair thou owest, nor shall death brag thou wanderest in his shade, when in eternal lines to time thou growest. We need this. We need to learn to be fully present with each other. We need to speak and to listen to each other in a way that allows the possibility of change. We need art. So long as men can breathe and eyes can see, so long lives this, and this gives life to thee. Thank you.
Wherever they're shopping, you're there. Open everywhere with Square.
What's crispy and makes me go nom nom? Nom nom. Just say Club Crisps.
Okay, I have a confession to make, and I'm just gonna get this off my chest now, and then we can just roll right forward, okay? Sometimes I say naughty words. I know, it's very bad, it's very unprofessional, and so of course today I wasn't going to do that, but I realized very quickly that I would have to. I'd have to say one bad word, and it's the S word. I hope it's okay. Is it okay? Yeah. Shakespeare. Now, I know we laugh, but in my experience, telling people that you study or worse, enjoy the work of William Shakespeare is the fastest way to both impress and horrify people. It might as well be a bad word. Here's what I typically hear from children and adults when I drop the notorious S word into conversation. Shakespeare? I'm not smart enough for Shakespeare. Well, Shakespeare wasn't writing exclusively for smart people. He wrote for everybody, from poor stable boys all the way up to the Queen of England. Okay, but I also can't read Old English, because it's old. You probably read it in black and white. Well, I can't read Old English either. It's basically German. So it might be a relief to find out that Shakespeare wrote in early modern English, which isn't far from what we speak right now. But Shakespeare is just boring. That's all I ever hear about, is that Shakespeare's boring. This always stumps me for a sec. I guess if you consider, war, love triangles, mistaken identities, sociopaths, witty banter, slapstick comedy, half animals, half humans, I guess if none of that interests you, then Shakespeare would be boring. But ultimately what I'm going to say to my skeptics is, it's Will's world, and you're already living in it. Ever tell a knock-knock joke? That's Shakespeare. Do you wear your heart upon your sleeve? That's Shakespeare. Do you ever want to break the ice? Have you ever felt like you were in a pickle or that you've seen better days? Is there a method to your madness? Do you eat your parents out of house and home? Have you said that love is blind? And even if all of this is Greek to you, it's still all Shakespeare. Now, maybe I haven't convinced you yet. That's okay. You're sitting here today and you're thinking, nope, Shakespeare isn't for me. I know. Well, first thing is that you're not alone. In fact, I bet you can find an ally here in this very room. But present company aside, there were also some other literary giants, writers right up there with Shakespeare, who also didn't get what he was doing. For instance, we have Voltaire, Lord Byron, Tolstoy, and Shaw. All famous Shakespeare haters. In fact, Voltaire over here, he went so far as to say that Shakespeare's work was an enormous dunghill. How nice. But aside from name-calling and perhaps a little bit of jealousy, boys, people would go so far as to even diagnose this crippling fear of a 400-year-old ghost. In fact, Giles Terrara and Dan Poole call it Shakespearism, an irrational aversion to Shakespeare and his plays. Now, the first time I read that, I wish I had coined that term, because I see new cases of Shakespearism every day. It's more contagious than the common cold, and your symptoms will start to show up before you've touched a single page. Picture this. Your English teacher tells...
All right. We can stop here today because we're not talking about Macbeth, and we talked about Othello today, so now you're familiar with it. So now you're going to go ahead and you're going to look at some trailers of some other movies, more modern day ones, and compare them. Okay. Don't forget to do your work, your homework, because some of you are missing your work, but you still have time to do it. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful rest of the week, and I will see you next time.